So I've been working with Sanctuary for a few years now in terms of supporting the staff to better support the vulnerable people that they're working with. And one of the ways in which I try and explain to anybody who I'm training or anybody I'm trying to help to understand exploitation is that it's all about what we as human beings have as basic human needs, and they're lifelong basic human needs, but they're very dominant when we're small. We need obvious things. We need water, we need food, we need shelter. Without sufficient of those, we die. But just as important as those things are, but less obvious, are our need to be attuned to be attached to somebody, to be recognised as unique and special and amazing, and to be given physical comfort and care. Without those things, or without them as a child, as an infant, we die. But without sufficient, we certainly don't thrive. So when things go right, what happens is the child gets their needs met. If you have your needs met, you no longer have those needs. You grow into an older child. You continue to get those relational needs met, you don't have those needs. Really fortunate children grow up into older children who first of all understand what their needs are, second of all know how to get them met. They've got this whole internal reservoir of having had those needs met, and they can pull on that. When their parent or parent substitute aren't around 24/7, at age appropriate stages, they can pull on this internal reserve. They know they're loved, they know they're lovable. Those children grow into older children and then into adults who know what their needs are, know how to get them met. They have this reserve whereby they can meet other people's needs and people can continue to meet their needs. And if and when children come along, use this internal reserve to meet those children's relational needs. That would be perfect if everybody got that, but a lot of people don't. Some people get their needs either insufficiently met or not met at all. If you have a need and it's insufficiently met, you just get needier. If you continue to get insufficiently met, you get needier and needier and needier and needier until we are screaming out for our relational needs to be met. Love me, love me. I'll behave as badly as I can just in the desperate hope that you will notice me. I'll behave as well as I can just in the hope that you will notice me. Please love me. Adolescents, sex hormones, sex offenders, they step in and they say, I'll love you. And they go some way to meeting those basic human needs in the most malignant and disgusting and horrific way possible. But at least they go some way to meeting those basic human needs. The professional then comes along and says to the adolescent or the vulnerable adult, what's going on there? That's abuse, that's icky. Why didn't you see that? Why didn't you tell us about that? Tell you what we'll do. You tell us everything that's gone on here. We'll do everything we can to get that person locked up into prison. And if we can't manage that, the very least we're going to do is going to ensure that you never have to see that person again. And we wonder why the person goes, not on your life. Take away the one person that went some way to meet my basic human needs, you must be joking. That's the experience of lots of exploited, abused and domestically violated people. The best way I know of talking about it is to talk about it as if it's thirst. It's not thirst, but it's an awful lot like thirst. When we have a need, we could imagine that need is thirst. If we get sufficient to drink, we're not thirsty. So really fortunate children, they get their relational needs met. They get sufficient to drink relationally. If you get sufficient to drink relationally, you're not thirsty. You go into an older child, continue to get sufficient to drink relationally, not thirsty. The really fortunate children never ever feel especially relationally thirsty because they have sufficient water to meet that relational thirst. Those children grow up into older children who first of all know what thirst is, pretty vital that. They've got a whole internal reservoir that they can now pull on. They know they're loved, they know they are lovable. They grow into older children and then into adults who first of all understand what thirst is, pretty vital that. They therefore know how to get it met. They have a whole internal reserve that they can be pulling on. They now know how to make sufficiently appropriate relationships with potential partners and colleagues and friends. And they have this whole internal reserve whereby they can continue to meet those people's relational needs too. Children come along, whole internal reservoir whereby they can now meet the relational needs of their children. That would be pretty awesome if everybody could do that and everybody got that. How much easier would most of our roles be? Probably many of us would be out of work, but I'd be willing to bet we'd be willing to live in a world where our roles weren't needed. We don't live in that world. We live in a world where some people get insufficient or nothing to drink relationally. If we get insufficient or nothing to drink, we get thirstier. If we continue to get insufficient or nothing to drink, we get thirstier and thirstier and thirstier. And some people are dying of thirst. If you were dying of thirst and I approach you with a bottle of water, it's pretty cruddy, to be fair. There's some fag butts in there, there's some used condoms, there's some black mould on the inside, there's some brown, questionable, sticky stuff. If you're dying of thirst and approach with that bottle of water, you'll likely take it. You're unlikely to be saying to me, no thanks. If you just run along now, please, and fetch me back some Evian, king of water as far as I'm concerned, because if you did that, you'd have to croak after me, but please hurry, because I might be dead by the time you get back. If you're dying of thirst and I approach you with cruddy water, you will likely take cruddy water. That is the experience of lots of exploited and violated individuals. We then come along and we wonder why the person doesn't recognise the cruddiness of the water. Some people do. Some people come forward and they tell us how badly they're being treated. Other people don't. But we wouldn't recognise the cruddiness of water either. If all we'd ever tasted was stagnant water, we'd not be able to taste the stagnancy of water. If we're going to support people to stop drinking stagnant water, the last thing we should be doing to them is just telling them not to drink stagnant water, because that's what we tend to do. We tend to say, that's icky, stagnant water, don't drink it. Because the only people who could choose not to drink stagnant water are the really fortunate ones who've got a really good, clean and clear water supply elsewhere. If they did, why would they be drinking that stuff? And the other ones who've got this whole internal reservoir, which means they could step away from the stagnant water and still be hydrated. That is not the experience of most exploited, abused and violated individuals. The only way we could possibly hope to support someone not to drink stagnant water is if we become part of the solution. I have to pledge to provide Evian quality response to this kind of vulnerability. And if everybody did that, give them a mouthful of Evian, and the next professional gives them a mouthful of Evian, and the next professional gives them a mouthful of Evian, not only could we rehydrate people, if we stick around long enough, and that's the real importance, we have to stick around long enough, eventually we will start to give people an internal reservoir that will put them on the even footing with those who had the good enough to begin with. The trouble is, if people who've only ever tasted stagnant water, Evian will taste weird to them, won't it? And they'll probably spit it out, usually directly back into our faces. I'm pretty sure all of you have had the experience of somebody spitting Evian directly back at you. Recognise you didn't do anything wrong, but also recognise those people need Evian more than anybody we have ever met in our entire lives, because familiar is always comfortable, even if familiar is hideous. If somebody spits Evian back at you, wipe it away, metaphorically, and stick around. Keep offering the Evian. To walk away from someone who's spitting Evian is akin to finding someone who is dying of thirst in the desert, so close to death. They're not calling out for help. They're like the most vulnerable people in our communities. They're slowly suffering. But what are the chances I found this guy? And not only have I found him in the desert, I got some Evian with me. And I said to him, okay, I've got your head. Don't worry, I'll hold your head. Don't waste your energy holding your head. And I pour a small mouthful of Evian into his mouth. And he coughs it all back out again. And I say, oh, all right, you don't want it. Fair enough. Stick his head back down in the sand, step over him, put my lid on my bottle and carry on my way. Would have been kinder just to let the guy die. Finding him, telling him I know what his issue is, telling him I have the solution to his issue, and then blaming him because he doesn't swallow the first mouthful I offer him. Telling myself and him he's choosing not to drink. As I walk away, telling myself that I really ought to respect his lifestyle choice to die of thirst in the desert. Would have been kinder to just let him die. If you're going to try and intervene, you have to stick around. You have to stick around for as long as it takes to get sufficient of this stuff into people. We often are tempted to fixate on the condoms and the fag bots and the black mold and the brown sticky stuff. That is not why people are induced into these kinds of relationships. They're going there for the water. Let them tell you about the water, and only when you understand how their basic needs are being met by these abusive situations will you be in any position to put into place that kind of water elsewhere so the person could choose to leave. And of course, one of the most vital things that we need to understand is that if we've got professionals such as yourself who are being tasked with utilising themselves relationally in order to support people to leave these abusive situations, if they're being required to supply relational Evian, we have to supply them with sufficient relational Evian in order to be topped up enough to continue to do that. And I guess, it's been my privilege that that's been part of my role at Sanctuary, to support the amazing women and men that have spent the last number of years trying to safeguard, trying to support and continue to try and help to rebuild their lives and to provide sufficient relational water for some of these really, really, really harmed people to go on and live lives that will be not only okay enough, but that would be good.